The night my brother got promoted to senior partner at his law firm, my mother introduced me to the room as the one who didn't quite make it. Not in those exact words. She never used those exact words. She had a talent for wrapping cruelty inside something that sounded almost like a joke. Almost like affection. Almost like she hadn't just said what she'd clearly said. What she actually said was, "And this is my younger one, Ellie. She's in education." Then she laughed a little and added, "We can't all be lawyers, right?" And my father, standing beside her with a glass of scotch, smiled at the man he was talking to and said, "Every tree's got a branch that grows sideways." The man my father said that to was named Roland Whitfield. He was 60-something, silver-haired, the kind of person who fills a room without raising his voice. He was the founding partner of the firm my brother had just been promoted within. He was, by every measure my family used to calculate human worth, important. He did not smile when my father said that. I noticed. I was standing close enough to notice, but I looked away quickly, the way you do when you spent your whole life pretending not to hear things that were said loudly enough that you were clearly meant to hear them. I should back up. My name is Ellie Marsh. I'm 31 years old. I teach 7th and 8th grade English at a public middle school in Columbus, Ohio, which is, according to my mother, something you say quietly at parties and move on from quickly. According to my father, it is a safe choice for someone without a lot of ambition. According to my brother, and here's the thing about my brother, he usually doesn't say the cruel parts out loud. He outsources that to our parents and just nods in agreement. It is admirable. In its own way. In its own way. I've been teaching for 7 years. I run the after-school writing program. I coach the junior academic bowl team. 2 of my former students are now in college on full scholarships, one at Ohio State, one at Northwestern, and both of them have told me in the particular way teenagers have when they're trying to say something serious, that my class changed how they think. I have a small apartment I pay for myself, a savings account that would surprise my parents if they knew the number, and a life that, when I'm being honest with myself in the quiet of an ordinary Tuesday evening, feels like mine in a way their lives never looked to me. But I've also sat at enough family dinners to understand that none of that is the currency my family trades in. My brother, his name is Aaron, has always been the one. He was the one with the grades, the one with the LSAT score, the one who got into Georgetown Law and sent back a framed copy of the acceptance letter for our parents to hang in the hallway. Which they did. They actually hung it in the hallway. My senior photo from high school lived in a box in the hall closet for 11 years before I stopped noticing its absence. I want to be careful here because I've had a lot of time to think about this, and I've tried not to make Aaron into a villain. He isn't one. He's just a person who benefited from a particular family ecosystem and didn't question it the way fish don't question water. He was kind to me sometimes. He remembered my birthday most years. He is not a bad person, but he also never once in 31 years said, "That's not fair." He never said, "Why isn't her picture on the wall too?" He never pulled our mother aside and told her that what she said at a party was unkind. He let the water be water and swam in it comfortably, and I think that is its own kind of thing, even if it doesn't have a clean name. The night of the promotion party was a Saturday in March. The firm had rented out the private dining room at a restaurant downtown called Hargrove's, the kind of place with leather menus and no prices listed and wait staff who refill your water glass before you realize it was getting low. My mother had called me the Wednesday before to tell me I was expected to attend, using the word expected the way she always did. Not as a request, not quite as a demand, but as something that simply existed, the way weather exists, and you could either bring an umbrella or get wet. I brought an umbrella. I always brought an umbrella. I wore a dark green dress I bought on sale at the end of last winter. It was a good dress. I knew it was a good dress. I told myself in the mirror before I left that I knew it was a good dress, which is the kind of thing you have to tell yourself when you've spent 3 decades being measured against a standard you didn't design and kept coming up short. The room was full of Aaron's colleagues and their spouses and a scattering of firm clients. My parents had arrived before me and were already in the center of things the way they always were. My mother in a black dress that cost more than my monthly car payment, my father in a suit that fit the way expensive suits fit when they're made for exactly one body. Aaron saw me come in and waved from across the room. He looked genuinely glad to see me in that moment. I think he was. I think the complicated thing about Aaron is that he contains both the person who is genuinely glad to see me and the person who has never once defended me, and he lives with that contradiction so easily it barely registers. I got a glass of wine and found a place near the edge of things, which is where I usually find myself at family events, not because I'm shy, but because the center of things in my family has never had room for me. I was talking to Aaron's wife. Her name is Candace, and Candace has always been careful around me. The way kind people are careful around a situation they can see is unfair, but don't want to become part of. When my mother found me, she found me the way a heat-seeking mechanism finds its target, efficiently, without apparent effort, guided by some internal system I have never fully understood. She had Roland Whitfield with her. "Ellie," she said, and her voice had that particular warmth in it that she reserved for public situations, the warmth that existed in direct proportion to the number of people watching. "There you are. I want you to meet Roland Whitfield. He's the reason Aaron has had such a wonderful home for his career." She said it like that, a wonderful home for his career. And even the phrasing was designed to remind me that I did not have such a home, that I had chosen the educational equivalent of a studio apartment when I could have had something better. Roland Whitfield extended his hand. I shook it. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't immediately read. Not the polite attention people deploy when they're being introduced to someone they don't expect to need to remember. Something more focused than that. Something that made me feel, briefly and uncomfortably, like he was trying to place me. "Ellie teaches middle school," my mother continued. "English. She's always loved books." She said the last part with a small uplift in her voice that turned it into something gentle and slightly pitying, the way you'd say someone's always loved birds or always had a thing for crossword puzzles. My father had materialized at her elbow. He had his scotch and his particular expression, the one that meant he was having a good time and didn't want it complicated. "Education's noble work," Roland Whitfield said. "It is," my mother agreed, and moved to redirect the conversation toward Aaron, who was approaching from behind me, because that was always the move. I was always the pause before the real subject. But Roland Whitfield didn't redirect. He was still looking at me, and then he said, "Columbus City Schools," or "Jefferson Middle," I said, "South Side." Something shifted in his expression. "Your writing program," he said. "The after-school one, do you run it yourself?" I felt something go very still inside me. "Yes," I said. "For the past 4 years." He set his drink down on the tray of a passing waiter with the deliberate movement of someone who has just decided to give their full attention to something. "My granddaughter was in your class," he said, 3 years ago. 7th grade. Her name was Abigail. I knew immediately who he meant. Abby. Quiet in class until she wasn't. Turned in 3-page responses when the assignment called for 1 paragraph. Wrote a personal essay in the spring of her 7th grade year about her parents' divorce that made me sit at my desk after school for a long time before I could bring myself to write comments on it, because it was that honest, that clean, that completely without self-pity. "Abby," I said. Of course I remember Abby. My mother had gone quiet beside me. I could feel it without looking. That specific quality of her silence when something wasn't going the direction she planned. "She talks about your class," Roland Whitfield said. "Still, she's a sophomore in high school now, and she still talks about your class." He paused. "She told me you were the first teacher who told her that the way she sees things matters, that her perspective has value." He stopped. He picked up his drink again, but he didn't drink from it. "I want you to know that she was going through a very difficult period when she was in your class. Her parents had just separated. She was not in a good place. And the way you treated her work, the seriousness you brought to it, the way you responded to what she actually wrote instead of what she was supposed to write." He stopped again. He seemed to be choosing something. "It mattered more than I think you know." I did not cry at a law firm promotion party in a restaurant called Hargroves with leather menus and waitstaff who refill your water before you notice. I wanted to. I am telling you, I wanted to. I said, Abby is a remarkable person. That was entirely her. She says the same about you, he said. My father had developed an expression I had not seen before. My mother was standing with the stillness of someone who has stepped off a curb and is waiting to feel the impact. Aaron arrived at my elbow. Mr. Bertains. Whitfield, he said, warm, practiced, professional. I hope my sister isn't monopolizing you. Not at all, Roland Whitfield said. He looked at Aaron with an expression that was perfectly pleasant and revealed nothing. I was just telling your sister that she taught my granddaughter, Abigail Whitfield, 3 years ago. Aaron glanced at me. Something moved across his face that I couldn't entirely name. I didn't know that, he said. No, Roland Whitfield said mildly. I imagine not. There was a pause that lasted perhaps 3 seconds and felt longer. Then Roland Whitfield turned back to me and said, I'd like to introduce you to someone if you have a moment. A colleague of mine is here tonight. She runs the Whitfield Foundation. We fund educational initiatives in underserved districts across Ohio. She's been looking for someone to consult on an expansion of a middle school literacy program. I think you might find it interesting. I heard my mother make a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of a recalibration. I'd love that, I said. The woman he introduced me to was named Patricia Chen, and she had short gray hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain and the handshake of someone who has made a lot of decisions. She asked me about Jefferson Middle's after-school program and listened to my answers in the way people listen when they're actually assessing, not just being polite. She asked about retention rates, about curriculum design, about what worked and what I'd tried and abandoned and why. We talked for 40 minutes. My mother drifted over twice. Both times, Patricia continued speaking to me as though the arrival of additional people was not something she needed to accommodate. I don't know if this was intentional. I think it might have been. At the end of the conversation, Patricia gave me her card and said, I'll have my assistant reach out Monday. We're bringing on 3 consultants for the expansion rollout, and I'd like you to be in that conversation. The consulting fee she mentioned casually at the end was more than I made in 4 months of teaching. I held the card in my hand after she walked away and stood there for a moment in the noise and warmth of the room. My father found me a few minutes later. He looked like he was approaching a situation he hadn't prepared for, and was trying to make the approach look natural. Roland Whitfield's family has a lot of pull in this city, he said. I know, I said. That woman he introduced you to, the foundation, Patricia Chen, I said. Yes. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I hadn't seen from him in a long time, maybe ever. It was not an apology. I want to be honest. It was not an apology, and I was not waiting for one, not anymore. But it was something. The particular look of a person who has been operating on a set of assumptions and has just watched one of them fail a load-bearing test. You've been doing good work, he said, out there. I looked at him. My father, who had called my career a safe choice for someone without a lot of ambition. My father, who had described me to Roland Whitfield as a branch that grows sideways. I know, I said, and I said it quietly, without heat, without the accumulated weight of 31 years pressing behind it. I just said it, because it was true. I had known it for a long time, whether or not they had. He nodded. He finished his scotch. He went to find my mother. I stood by the windows that looked out over the city for a while, watching the lights. Aaron came and stood next to me. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there. He had a way of doing that sometimes, showing up without a script and not quite knowing what to do without one. I really didn't know about Whitfield's granddaughter, he said. I know you didn't. She really talks about your class still? Apparently. He was quiet again. The city did what cities do at night. Kept moving, kept being lit up by 10,000 ordinary lives proceeding in the dark. Mom didn't mean it badly, he said. The thing she said when she introduced you, she just doesn't always, Aaron, I said. Not sharply. not with the edge in it I had carried around for years. Just his name said clearly, which was enough to stop him. He stopped. "I'm not angry," I told him. "I want you to know that. I spent a long time being angry and I'm tired of it, but I also don't need you to explain her to me. I've known her my whole life." He looked at his shoes. He looked back up. I should have said something. Over the years, more than I did. That was the most he had ever said about it. It was less than what a different version of the story might have required, but it was his, and he said it without prompting. And I think about that sometimes, about how the people we love are often capable of less than what we need from them, and whether that capacity, however limited, is still worth something. "It would have helped," I said. "It would have helped when we were kids if you'd said something." He nodded. He didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else to say, really. Not in the middle of his promotion party, not in a room full of his colleagues, not in the 20 minutes before the formal dinner seating began. We stood there a while longer. Then he went back to his people and I went back to mine, which that night unexpectedly included Patricia Chen's business card in my right hand and Roland Whitfield somewhere across the room, talking to someone else, not glancing over to see how I was receiving any of this. That was the thing about him I kept thinking about later. He had said what he said and then he'd moved on because he hadn't said it to change the dynamic in the room or to score something or to make a point. He'd said it because it was true. Because Abby had told him things about my class that mattered to him, and when he met me, he said so. That was all. That was the whole thing. And somehow that the plainness of it, the absence of performance, was what made it land. I called Patricia Chen's office the following Monday morning before I drove to school. I sat in my parking spot outside Jefferson Middle with the heat running because March in Columbus is still cold enough to need the heat running, and I spoke to her assistant for 4 minutes and scheduled a call for Thursday afternoon. That Thursday call turned into a follow-up meeting. The meeting turned into a 12-week consulting engagement. The engagement turned into a longer-term contract with the Whitfield Foundation that I'm currently in the middle of, and that has changed, in practical terms, a meaningful number of things about my life. My mother called me 2 weeks after the party. She called on a Sunday, which was unusual. She was a Wednesday caller, reliable as weather. "I heard you're doing some work with the Whitfield Foundation," she said. "I am," I said. A pause. "That's quite something." "It is," I said. Another pause. Longer. "Ellie," she said, and her voice had something in it I hadn't heard directed at me before. Not warmth exactly, more like the early stage of warmth. The moment before warmth, when someone is still deciding. "I want you to know that your father and I are proud of you." I sat with that for a second. "Thank you," I said. And I meant it, in the complicated way you can mean something that comes 12 years too late and is still, despite everything, worth receiving. We talked for 20 minutes. She asked about the foundation work. She asked about my students. She told me about a dinner they were planning for Easter and said she hoped I could come and that maybe I could tell everyone a bit about the program. I said I'd think about it. I did think about it. I'm still thinking about it. It's not a simple thing, deciding how much space to make for people who made very little space for you, deciding what forgiveness looks like when it isn't the clean cinematic version but the ongoing, complicated, imperfect kind that doesn't resolve in a single conversation at a restaurant with leather menus. What I know is this. I am 31 years old. I teach 7th and 8th grade English at a public middle school on the south side of Columbus, and I am good at it. And it has mattered to actual people in ways that I didn't always let myself fully believe. I have a consulting contract with a foundation that funds educational access for kids who don't have much, and I got it not because of who my family is or who they know, but because I did the work and the work found its own way back to me. I have an apartment that is mine. I have a savings account. I have former students who are in college right now, studying things that interest them, thinking in ways they learned to think in a 7th grade classroom on a Tuesday afternoon when I told them their perspective has value. Some nights I drive home from Jefferson Middle and the particular golden light that comes over Columbus in the late afternoon when the day is wrapping up and the kids have gone home and the hallways have gone quiet. And I feel something that I think is the real version of what my parents were always chasing, not the performance of success, the actual thing, the thing where you know, privately, without needing anyone to see it, that what you are doing matters and that you are capable of it, and that you are, in the most important ways, exactly where you're supposed to be. Abby Whitfield sent me a message 3 weeks after the party. She found me on the school staff directory and sent an email to my school address. It was 2 paragraphs long. It said she'd heard from her grandfather that he'd met me at a party, and she wanted to say that she thinks about my class a lot, that she's in an AP English class now, and her teacher tells her she has a strong voice in her writing. And that she wanted me to know that the essay she wrote in 7th grade, the one about her parents, she's been revising it. She thinks it might be something. She asked if I'd be willing to read a new draft sometime. I wrote back and said yes. I said yes immediately, that same evening sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside my laptop. I said yes, because Abby Whitfield at 15 is still Abby Whitfield at 12, still that exact same honest, clean, completely unself-pitying voice working its way towards something true, and if I can be a useful reader for that, there is nothing complicated about the answer. Some things are just yes. The rest of it, the family, the weight of it, the long, slow work of deciding what to carry and what to set down. That's the part that takes longer. That's the part I'm still in the middle of. But the yes part, the Abby part, the standing in the hallway after school part, the watching a kid find out what they're made of part, that was always clear. Even when nothing else was. That was always the part I was sure of. I thought a lot about what made that night turn the way it did. Not Roland Whitfield's kindness, though that was real. Not the consulting contract, though that changed things in practical ways I'm still grateful for. What I keep coming back to is something quieter than any of that. The simple fact that Abby had done the work of remembering, and her memory had legs, and it walked into a room I didn't know it could reach. That's the part nobody talks about when they talk about cause and effect. We think of consequences as things that happen to us from the outside. Someone rewards us, someone punishes us, a door opens or closes. But the real version is slower and less dramatic. It's a 7th grader sitting with a blank page in an after-school program, deciding whether to write something true or something safe. It's a teacher deciding whether to take that honest, painful essay seriously, or to write good effort in red pen and move on. Every one of those decisions has a direction to it. They don't disappear. They just travel at a speed you can't always see. I chose to teach because I believed it mattered. Not because it was prestigious, not because it paid well, it doesn't, not in the conventional sense, but because I had been a kid once who needed someone to tell me that what I saw and felt and thought had value, and nobody said it loudly enough. And I wanted to be the person who said it loudly enough to someone else. That wasn't noble in the way people call things noble when they mean small. It was the most serious decision I ever made. And for years, I made it inside a family that treated it as evidence of limitation. That's a particular kind of weight. Not the weight of failing, but the weight of succeeding at something the people closest to you have decided doesn't count. I carried that weight. I'm being honest that I carried it, that it bent some things in me, that there were Tuesday evenings when I sat in my car in the school parking lot and let myself feel the full size of how unseen I was. But I kept going in anyway, not out of stubbornness, not to prove something to anyone. Because the kids were there. Because Abby was there in 7th grade with her honest, careful writing and her parents' divorce sitting behind her eyes, and she needed someone to take the work seriously, and I was the person in the room who could do that. What I've come to understand is that integrity isn't a performance. It doesn't require an audience. The version of yourself you build in private, in the unmarked hours, in the work nobody's watching, in the choices you make when the outcome isn't guaranteed. That version is the one that lasts. That's the one that walked into Hargrove's restaurant with me that Saturday night in March without my knowing it, and sat down at the table and waited. My father said I'd been doing good work out there. He meant it as a beginning, I think, A first step towards something neither of us has fully named yet. I'm not sure what I owe that step, whether to meet it or to let it be what it is, a small and late acknowledgement from a man who took 31 years to get there. What I know is that I don't need it to complete anything. The work was always complete on its own terms. Abby knew that before my father did. And some days, when I'm driving back from Jefferson Middle in that late afternoon Columbus light, I think, that's enough. That's actually more than enough.